Welcome to the Reimagining Faith podcast with the Pastors Jackson. This is a podcast for seekers, dreamers, and fellow sojourners who are trying to figure out what it means to be followers of Jesus in the 21st century. I'm so happy to be back recording podcasts. It has been a absolutely wild and crazy month as we have officially moved into our new house in Pottstown. We are still not yet fully unpacked, but I have enough of a makeshift podcast studio that we can be recording again. We have also officially launched Open Table United Church of Christ. We've had a couple of worship services now, and we are firing on all cylinders. If you are interested in finding out more about our church, you can visit opentablepottstown.com. There'll be a link in the show notes, opentablepottstown.com. Our worship services are at the Steel River Playhouse on High Street and right in the middle of Pottstown at 10 o'clock in the morning on Sundays. You can also find us on YouTube and on our website. We're trying to be as accessible as possible. So we would love for you to join us on a Sunday or whenever it is or wherever it is that you're able to. Today, we are really excited to welcome one of our good friends and somebody who is doing a lot of really important work in the area, Will Fuller. He is the regional director of Power Metro, which is something that he'll explain in greater detail at the very beginning of the episode. Suffice it to say, he is an advocate for justice of all kinds. He has a master's in education as well as in theology. So he is somebody who cares deeply about our public schools, and everything that he does with a really thoughtful, spirit-filled theological backing. The work that he does for Power is really important, and we as a church and we as individuals have been involved with that. And so it's a really fun conversation, and I think you'll enjoy.
Well, we're so glad to have you here with us. Thank you so much for joining us.
It's good to be here.
You are the first person to be in this partially completed podcast studio.
It's a huge honor.
It really is. You have no idea how much of an honor this truly is for you. So, Will, we wanted to have you on the podcast because you're doing a million things in the area, you and Power. And we have a lot of folks who listen who are local, a lot of folks who are clergy, a lot of folks who are interested in doing good things for people. So we wanted to learn not only what Power is, what you do, how you got here, but also what's going on now and a million other things that we need to cover in the next 45 minutes. So
here we go. Okay.
So the very basic level, what is Power?
So Power Interfaith is a group of about 80 congregations across southeastern Pennsylvania. We are working for racial and economic justice on a livable planet. So that's kind of the guide to everything that we do. So we're people of different faith traditions, races, class, socioeconomic level, geography, et cetera, who've come together around this idea, right, that people of faith are called to be in the public arena, and they're called to impact and help the communities flourish that they live in, right? And one of the ways that we do that is through policy. So the main things we work on right now are fair funding, so trying to have the state distribute all of the state's share of budgets for local school districts fairly. We do some climate justice work, but we're always on the lookout for new issues. So one of the things that I love about community organizing is it's really adaptive to the nature of the problems of the communities it's in. So we listen, we try to find out where the people closest to the pain are hurting, where there's problems in communities, and then teach people how to make change through the lens of their faith.
That was an amazing elevator speech. I'm so very impressed. Yeah. Yeah. And so a lot of the reasons why I know Will is because as a pastor in Pottstown, I've been very connected to the fight for education funding equality. And we recently had a pretty significant win. Do you mind sharing about that?
Yeah, sure. So the most recent budget that was passed this year included a $525 million increase in education funding and an increase in Level Up funding, which was targeted funding for the 100 most shortchanged districts in the state. So that combined put us over $700 million total added to the budget. And all of that gets filtered through the FAIR formula. And in fact, the Level Up funding is directly to those 100 shortchanged districts. So that impacts Pottstown.
And I was going to say Pottstown is definitely one of those.
Yeah. Do you know offhand how much Pottstown is underfunded?
Underfunded, it's around $13 million per year. With this year, they actually received $3.9 million more than they had received the year before.
So wait, are you still 13?
Around
under?
10 now.
Okay.
Yeah.
Wow. $10 million underfunded.
And we're rooting for, 3 less. It's a win.
Yeah.
And I think one of the things that I have learned a lot by working with you, Will, is that progress is it doesn't usually happen a lot all at the same time. Like it's incremental stuff. And I wonder if you could share a little bit about that work. Especially, I know for me, I get discouraged. Like, well, we're 13, like, even 4 million, that doesn't even put it doesn't feel like it puts a dent, but it certainly does.
For sure. Yeah. I think a lot of times when we get into justice work, we live in the world as it should be, but we forget that we operate in the world as it is. Right. And I fall prey to that too.
Yeah.
So I think early on, especially when we first started the campaign, we had been a part of a coalition that had gotten the formula passed. This is 2015, 2016. Then the legislature promptly passed the formula and only applied it to the new money that they were putting in the budget for the consecutive years after they passed it. So that left, 95% of the budget virtually untouched and distributed the same old way. And really the first 3 or 4 years of us pushing for 100% fair funding, there wasn't a lot of not just victory, but even signs we were moving toward victory. We got a lot of slam doors, a lot of no's, a lot of we'll sees that didn't end up to amount to anything. And I remember, sitting in a diner on Hanover Street with one of our power leaders, Marlene, and we're just like, is this worth it? And I think when you're in justice work, you read stories in scripture about people experiencing some miraculous things and justice coming about, and you forget the timeline involved, and you forget that there's not the full story given of how many nights they spent wondering if God was going to be faithful to a promise or wondering if things were going to change.
Yeah.
So there were a lot of moments where I think we just wondered if this was actually possible. And I think we have to prepare people in justice work for that as a natural part of the process, that what we're after is progress and not perfection, and that we have to celebrate little wins. We have to make it a ritual to be exuberant about every little thing that we win on, to create a culture of moving towards some direction,
Yeah. I think that's a really good antidote for faith in general.
Yeah.
It can be easy to lose sight of growth when it's coming very slow, or you've been fighting the same thing for years.
Yeah, I have a really hard time with that, with climate activism. I know that's an issue that Power is working on now. That's kind of a newer initiative, right? Where it just seems like every time you just fight and fight and fight and fight, and then there's some little incremental victory, and you take a step back and look at the grand view, and it doesn't seem worth it. It doesn't seem possible that you can make a big enough difference in systems this big to change anything, anything meaningful anyway. That's gonna deter the path of doomsday down the road.
Yeah.
So I have a lot of respect for folks who are able to keep hope in the midst of all of these slamming doors and incremental change. I'm glad you're doing it. I could use a little bit of that hope, I think.
I'm glad that you're reminding us to keep at it as well. I think, at least for me, when I'm not in contact with you, I might not be thinking about it, right? Because there's so many things that are, so we need people like you to keep bringing us back to that.
Thanks. Yeah. Someone told me, one of our other directors, Nathan Soy, who's a longtime organizer, told me one time that all organizing is reminding. And in a sense, I think that's true both as an organizer and I think it's pastorally true as well, right? Like as faith leaders, whether you're leading a congregation or you're trying to organize, a faith community, it's reminding people of their values, reminding people of the story we're in, reminding people of who they care about, and grounding what we do in those things instead of having everyone spend their time looking at what they're doing. I think it's easy to focus on what you're doing and then lose sight of why, right? Or like that it's moving anywhere. And the task for us, and I mean, we need it just as much as like parishioners or leaders in an organization, to be reminded of the who and the why and where it's headed. And that my job, like our job isn't ultimately to like solve everything. It's to like do faithfully our part in the bigger picture. And that's where, for me, faith comes in, right? Of like, there are other people out there doing these little small incremental things too. And that actually builds some collective power if we could get it all geared toward the same direction. But it's one of those seasons that I think we've always needed it, but I just feel like in this season we're in right now, it's just more so than ever. Like we need that constant anchoring in the who and the why. There's so many things getting in the way of that.
Yeah. I mean, practically, how do you organize that? I feel like we're all doing good work in our own little silos. How do we bring that together so that we can have a bigger impact?
Yeah, I mean, so like I can speak a little bit about the process of organizing, and then I can give an example that we have coming up of that playing out. So in organizing, we talk about it really as like 4 movements of a symphony or 4 big parts of a cycle, right? So the first one is one-to-one meetings, sitting down with people individually where you share stories, you surface values, and you start to hear about the things that are in the way of people's flourishing. You do enough of those and some common themes start to emerge. Whether it's just common problems centered around a potential common issue or whether it's common pains, you listen first and then you call people together and you start learning about what's the issue behind the problem, right? So for every amorphous problem like education, there's a specific issue like fair funding that we have to decide whether we have the ability to win on or not. So you lead people through that process of meeting with community leaders, talking with other communities who've encountered similar situations, kind of fact-finding and discovering more information and then assessing whether you have the ability to win on it now or not. Because we don't really encourage people to necessarily tackle things right away that they can't win on. But figuring out what a win is. And then you move into action, right? Which action is public tension that you raise. And we do that through the lens of our faith to create a reaction in the decision maker that we want to change their mind on. Someone who has the power to give us what we want on the issue. We raise the tension to where they're forced to make a choice, whether to do what we ask or not. And then we evaluate. Do we have the power to do that? Do we win? Do we lose? And that sends us back into those individual conversations. So those are the 4 movements. It's listening, research, action, evaluation. We've been moving into sort of an action phase with power. And that's a concrete example of what we're up to now. We're having a refounding convention on October 22nd, Saturday, 4 to 7 p.m. at St. Paul's Baptist Church in Westchester. And it's really a come and see event for people to learn more about who we are. And it's also a celebration of the work that we've done. So we want to talk about the millions of dollars that we've won in fair funding and what that means for kids. We want to talk about the issues we care about, like voting, like climate change. We want to commit publicly together to the work ahead, right? We're living in times where now more than ever, people who are people of faith have to get clear on what that means and what it looks like to show up in public with love. So it's our chance really to have an action where we can invite more people into the movement. And that's taken time to get to, right? We've been organizing to get to this culminating event, but we're excited about what we think is going to happen that day.
So refounding event?
A refounding convention.
Is this like renewing your vows?
A little bit, yeah.
Okay. I'm just.
I'll show up in my wedding dress.
I'm just curious about why that word refounding. Is this like you guys are thinking about this as step one of a new era? Are you getting back to basics? Is this you just wanted to see if you fit in your wedding dress?
No to that last one for sure for me.
You don't fit in your wedding dress
not anymore.
Okay.
So we founded as an off branch of Power, right? So Power Metro being the 4 suburban counties that are involved with Power Interfaith, the statewide organization. We started in 2015, and we had an original convention in Lansdale. And it was sort of our public, like, here's who we are and here's what we're committed to, right? But that was, 7+ years ago, and a lot has happened geopolitically and, et cetera since then.
I think COVID time counts as 10 years. So.
Can you say what counties are the 4 counties?
Yeah, so Bucks County, Chester County, Montco, and Delaware County.
Okay.
Yeah, so, a refounding is sort of it's an opportunity to look back at where we started and where we've come. And also, almost a 2.0 in a sense, right? Like we are who we are, and we're also stepping into a new place in the life of our organization. We've grown, we've expanded, we're, and the moment has grown too. Like we need to meet the moment we're in. Yeah. And we're inviting people to join us with that.
That feels a lot like what we're trying to do as a church. We're the name of our podcast is Reimagining Faith. What does it mean to be the church in 2022? With the political climate, with the climate.
The climate.
Yeah, the climate. What does it mean? So I think we're really excited to join.
Can people join online for that event, or do they have to be there in person?
We're asking folks to show up in person. We are going to record the service and have it available afterward online for people. We're asking people if they want to come to register beforehand so we can get a head count for food, because we're going to have a light dinner there. And we want to be able to...
I saw that. That was what helped me pull the trigger. Yeah,
okay.
I was like, all right.
Me too, actually.
Me?
Yeah, that was the reason I decided to come. So, yeah.
Well, there'll be a link in the show notes down below, wherever it is that you're listening to this.
Yeah.
They all look different.
And so there's also this bus tour that's happening. Can you share a bit about that?
Yeah, we're busy. We're very busy. So it started with a conversation in July with some of our clergy and faith leaders around, this sort of growing public awareness of white Christian nationalism, right? So the political ideology that it was, what it meant for people of faith, what it meant for politics, and what did it look like to offer an alternative vision for public action and belonging for people who maybe were on the fence about that as a political identity, right? Like we know oftentimes in political climates, there's 20% at the far left, 20% at the far right. But for us as a C3, we operate oftentimes in that middle 60. So what does it look like for us as faith leaders to take the lead in offering an alternative to that vision of white Christian nationalism that's rooted in our faith, but is belonging and inclusive and includes policies that actually lead to thriving and flourishing for communities, right? And so out of that conversation grew this idea for doing a bus tour for faith leaders across the state of Pennsylvania. So we're calling it the Freedom Express. And the tagline is, all aboard. So that hashtag all aboard with power.
Yes.
It's pretty cool.
Yes.
The tagline is healing our faith in democracy. We believe that there's a lot of folks out there that are just looking for something different. And we believe that the solution to our times lives inside of us. And we have to step into that moment and meet it with a better alternative for what Pennsylvania could look like. That is irrespective of party. That's like rooted and grounded in love and is being led by people of faith. So starting October 18th and then finishing up November 4th, we're going to be getting on a bus and going across the state of Pennsylvania and stopping at different towns along the way. We'll be in the Lehigh Valley, Scranton. We'll be in Pittsburgh. We'll be out in Washington County in coal country, Central PA, and we'll end in Harrisburg. We'll have interfaith services, we'll have trainings, we'll do press conferences, we'll have shared meals with community members, and we'll talk about like what are the things that are facing you in your community. What are the ways that white Christian nationalism is being supported actually by funders who are very clear about the fact that they're pouring money into this as an ideology with very specific aims in mind that don't benefit really anybody, no matter what party you're affiliated with. And then to talk about, what power stands for. What do we think racial and economic justice on a livable planet looks like? Why is that beneficial for everyone, regardless of what race you are? Why is that beneficial for everyone, regardless of what class you're in? And imagining with people what it could look like for people across lines of difference in faith traditions to actually come together and present an alternate agenda that both parties have to turn their heads and listen to. Like that's what we want to. We will at least start the conversation with that. So that's what the bus tour is about. I'm excited. I'll be on it. There's still room. So if anyone is on this and they're interested, there's still room to get on the bus. So whoop, whoop.
All aboard.
Do they have to sleep on the bus too?
No, we'll be staying along the way. So you won't have to sleep on the bus. I mean, you can take a nap, I guess, if you get tired.
Is there going to be a stop in Pottstown?
Yes, actually. Yeah. So the same day as the convention, October 22nd, we are going to partner with the YWCA, Tri-County area. Shout out to the YW. They're amazing. So the YWCA is doing a week without violence. And the culminating event is a block party out in front of their office. I believe it's going to start at 10. We'll have to fact check that. But we're going to show up at the block party with the YWCA, and the clergy that are on the bus tour will be there.
Is that right in front of First Baptist?
Yes.
Okay.
Right in front of First Baptist Church. We'll do some door knocking, talking with people about registering to vote, talking with people about what issues they care about, what they want to see happen in this election. And then spending some time with people in the community, right? Like I think Pottstown, I think it's such an amazing, vibrant community with so much collegiality, and people love each other and they love Pottstown. And I'm excited for our other, clergy leaders across the state to feel that because it's a special vibe.
Isn't Pottstown like the best?
The best.
Don't you just want to move here?
Don't you just want to move here and
join a church?
Join a church. Start a new church. Yeah. Yeah. I know that vibe. I love that vibe.
It's special.
It's very special. It's very, very special. So what does it look like to get involved with power? If somebody is listening, they've never, I'm sure they could come to the refounding convention, but if they can't and they want to get involved, what can they do? What can they, I imagine there's a lot of different answers to that question.
Yeah. I mean, I would say it starts with a conversation. So whether it's with me, whether it's with another power leader, organizing happens best as a product of relationship. And so if there's someone out there who, you know, you've been toiling away doing justice work and you feel alone and you just want to connect with like-minded people, or maybe you're a person of faith and you're looking at the current climate and you're like, this doesn't stand for what I believe in, and I want to find a different way to engage. Like, we'd love to sit down over coffee or food with you and talk with you about your story, talk with you about what we do, see if it's a good fit. I mean, it's relational, and it's also one of those things that, you know, organizing demands things of people. You know, it demands commitment, it demands follow through, risk in some ways, right? Because we're drawing attention to change that needs to be made, and that's not always comfortable. But on top of having a conversation, and I'm happy to leave my contact information, you know, for folks to follow up with. There's lots of training opportunities, lots of ways to get connected to the broader Power Network. And the best place to do that would be our website, so powerinterfaith.org. We have a calendar on there of events, especially right now with our voting work and with the bus tour. There's so many ways that no matter where you live, you can come and see what we're about and meet some good people, and find out more about our organization and what we do.
That's awesome.
So of all the issues, tons of issues, they're all interconnected.
Yes.
They're all related. You can't take one out of isolation. That being said, where
You can ask him what his favorite one is.
What's your
favorite
your
injustice?
favorite injustice?
I mean, not when you say it like that. Say where is your heart most impassioned in these issues?
That's such a good question. I ask that a lot, and I don't know if I get asked that ever. If I had to pick one, you know, I got into the work with Power because of education, right? So I grew up in Western Kentucky. My dad just retired from being a high school teacher for 20 plus years. He was a high school coach. My sister's currently a high school teacher. My mom's a school nurse. My aunt was two aunts that were English teachers. So for me growing up, you know, in pretty rural Western Kentucky, public education was like my ticket into access, opportunity. I would not be where I am today without really amazing educators who were also people of faith, you know? And I think that school for me was not just about learning content. It was about forming me into a certain type of person that was curious about culture, curious about people who were different from me, aware of differences and actually honoring those, and learning how to learn, right? Like, I think that once you get hooked on learning, it never stops. And I value that a lot. And so coming into this work, you know, being able to work on something like fair funding, being able to work with the people we do in the school districts, like every day I'm blown away at what folks in public school systems do with what they're being given. Oh, yeah. Right? It's one of the first things that we take money away from, but it's one of the most crucial places of formation for everybody in our society. And it always pays back its investment, right? Like, it's the most safe investment you can make. And to me, as people of faith, you know, I believe that, like, my faith as a Christian, like, I'm called into public spaces to show up and to be active in the healing and the rebuilding of those places. And education gives me the opportunity to do that on a pretty big scale, especially with this campaign. So that's the one that really gets me, is like, what would it look like for every kid in this state, no matter what zip code they lived in, to have the option of going to an awesome public school that's going to shape them, form them, where they're going to get great, consistent teaching, where they're going to learn about the world, and they're going to walk away being the type of citizen that's really going to have a positive impact on PA and the United States and the world.
It seems really dangerous for those who are already entrenched in power to not power interfaith, but, you know, power, to have a well-educated young populace. I think people are very invested in making sure that children don't have those opportunities, so they don't start asking too many questions about why things are the way they are. Not to be all tinfoil hat, but
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah, like the one of the big arguments against, cheap or free higher education is that it affects military enlistment, because kids who don't have any other options, join the military so they can get an education. I've heard people, like politicians, say that quiet part out loud, that like we have to keep them poor and undereducated so that we can then use their bodies and exploit their poverty for our own good. And there's so many different issues of justice and the lack of human flourishing, all tied up, it seems, with every single issue. Like, there's just not an issue that is an issue. Everything exists in connection with like 13 other issues.
Yeah,
right.
Absolutely.
There's also this idea that if I budge for another person, I'm going to lose. And so I think in my experience with power and learning about the inequalities, I mean, like literally, like there's a line from one town or borough to the next, that there is this idea that if I give to this, then I'm going to take away. That there's not enough for everybody, and that I'm not going to give so that others can flourish. I'm not even going to. I'm not even going to face the direction of that, because, well, how am I going to tell these other kids that they're not going to get what they want? And I mean that certainly comes from where you're going to get your votes, how you're going to get elected. I mean, the rabbit hole you can keep going down, you know? And so, what does it look like for it to be equal? Equal doesn't just mean that we get the same thing. Like, if one is starting much lower, being equal doesn't mean giving you anyway.
Yeah. No, I mean, 100%.
Human selfishness. How do you combat that? How do you?
Tell us how to
I knew
overcome
that.
human
Can
selfishness.
you solve the human problem, please?
Next time, solving a human problem.
That's going to need to be a 2-part series. Yeah.
At least 2 parts. Yeah.
I mean, I think so. It comes up all the time, right? You're right. And when we talk about fair funding, inevitably we get that question of like, why should I take away money from these kids to give to these kids?
Yep.
To me, the way I approach that question is different with people of faith than it is with people out and about in the community, because I think there's a strategic element when you're talking about it at a community level, and then there's a theological issue that I think we bump up against when it's like an in-house conversation, right? So like if I'm talking with Christian folks at a church and they say that, I mean, inevitably we go back to the gospel, right? Like, and I think the question is just, if God adopted that attitude toward us, where would we be, right? But what we see in God is the incarnation shows that in our need, God did not think it unreasonable to be lavish in not only what God gave us through the gift of grace, but in showing up on our terms, on our turf as we are, right? That there's a fundamental going toward and not a hoarding of and a pulling away from that is fundamental to the nature of God. Now, you can't like explain that in front of 60 people when someone asks that question. But I think for me, I always respond with the question to plant the seed that I can follow up with, right? So like coming back to always like, what's the fundamental posture of Jesus and Jesus's approach to humanity? There's also just a lot of good stories in scripture that are like fundamentally against that. I mean, you have the example of the people working in the field where some cats show up at 8 a.m. and they're working all day. Other cats show up at 5 and they get paid the same wage.
Yep.
And people, I mean, they rail in the story, right? Like, that's not fair. Like, people shouldn't get more or should get as much as us who didn't bear the heat of the day. And ultimately in the parable, right? Like the person who's giving out the money is like, I get to decide what I do with this.
Yeah.
It's my money.
Yeah. And like lavishness is a way of life for God. And therefore it has to be a way of life for the Christ follower.
Yeah.
Without the fear that there won't be enough, because we also serve a God that somehow, you know, gets basketfuls of leftovers out of a weird bread and fish meal, you know, or like takes 12 people and changes an entire globe and multiplies that. Like, if God is the one who's created the heavens and the earth, I think God can figure out how to replenish resources. You know, that's the theological side. I think the practical side with that question, you know, is education is one of those things where we can either pay up front for people to build people into the types of communities we would want to have, or we pay later for the failure to do that. So we can take a look at the budget and we can look at line items, how much we pay to incarcerate people per person. Last I checked, it's like $40,000 per inmate, right? In our state. And talk about how that $40,000 probably would have been a lot better invested in a kid's education. I mean, there are states in the country who base beds in prisons for future building on second and third grade reading levels because they know the correlation between lack of education and where people end up later on down the line, right? And I think, Marlene Armato, one of our power leaders, I think she says it so succinctly and so well. It's like, you can pay to educate people now, or you can pay the cost of not doing that later. Either way, there's a cost, right? And it doesn't matter where you live. It doesn't matter how insulated you become from the reality of the world we're in. Sooner or later, it's going to impact you economically. It's going to impact you in the community when you go out and you're interacting with people from different places. So obviously that challenge has to come through relationship, but there are questions we plant for someone who would say, why would I give more so that others can have more? There's ways that we ask agitational questions to make people confront what they're saying and what the implications are of it.
Agitational questions.
I know. I love that.
That is a great phrase.
Agitational.
That will be the
And not
name
irritation, right?
No.
Sorry. No, like, we're not aggravating, we're not irritating, but we're putting a little pebble in the shoe.
If you ever
You're
decide
trying
to
to
start
get a
podcast,
response. You're trying to elicit someone to think.
We want them to have their own revolution. That's what I love about organizing, is you learn the power of a well-timed question, whether it's in an individual meeting or a group, that's just going to sit there and do its work and keep pushing people internally, and they do their own wrestling. Like, that's how change happens, I think, with people.
That'll be the name of your podcast. Agitational questions with Will
I know.
Fuller.
I'm
Episode
I'm loving
1,
that.
How to Change Human Nature.
What's up with pride?
Start bit. We'll
with pride.
But not the good kind, the bad kind.
Yeah.
Right.
What else might we ask? What would you like people to know?
I mean, I think just like, so reflecting on how I ended up where I am and doing what I'm doing.
Yes.
I think it's easy in progressive justice circles, especially in people of faith, to exhibit some of the same behaviors that fundamentalist Christians exhibit, just with a different set of 10 commandments and a different belief system. And the reason I bring that up is I think that regardless of the political line you fall upon, it's a lot less of a line and more like a horseshoe. And the two ends get closer and closer, the more extreme ends that they get. So for me, there's a place in which in justice work, people have to feel like they belong first. And then they learn the believing and the way of behaving, way of acting, way of looking at the world through relationship and through walking alongside a community of people that has their back no matter what, right? And I think we do people a major disservice if we say that you have to believe all the right things, know all the right phrase words and code words, talk about, anti-racism perfectly, or talk about whatever, like through the right lens first before you can be a part of what we're up to. Which again, like in my background, that was exactly what I experienced growing up as a fundamentalist Christian. And that's a lot of the reason why people walked away, because they just didn't feel a sense of belonging, right? So for me, I think, growing up conservative, Southern Baptist in a rural community in Kentucky, ending up working for an interfaith social justice organization in Philly, it's like really funny. And I would just say that what happened for me was a series of encounters, right? With systems, with God, with things not being okay the way they were, that forced me to go back and reevaluate how I was approaching the world and what I believed. And like, I thank God, like there were people to kind of walk with me through that were okay with where I was in the process. They knew I didn't have it all figured out, right?
It's a really good reminder.
Like partners in the journey,
meening people
almost spiritual
where they
directors,
are.
but like in a justice sense, like, because I'm still doing the work out of what I believe, like that hasn't changed, but the way that lives itself out in the everyday has changed significantly because of those encounters. Right. So, and I thank God for putting me in positions where I was able to have those. I think that in and of itself is like, I feel really grateful about, but I just feel like that's important to say. Like, it doesn't matter where you're at starting the journey. What matters is to take the first step and to find people who are willing to walk with you as you figure it out, who are able to hold a relationship with you and say, I'm not going to, reject you because you don't know the exact word to describe this, like, sociological phenomenon at the intersection of this and this, right? Like, but you can name it and you know what it looks like in your community and you want to do something about it. Relationship is not being pulled away from you. And we're going to learn with you how to show up well for other people.
Yes.
We're going to learn with you how to describe things that are going on in a way that doesn't hurt people, right? Or doesn't offend people from where they're coming from. Those are things people can learn along the way. But if they've got the willingness, like, we got to meet them and direct them on the journey. And I think that's what happened for me. And I feel really grateful for that, and all it takes is like a little leaning toward curiosity and wanting to know more. And I think God does so much with that, just that little bit of faith,
Yeah.
So if there are people, listening to this that are, like, they just don't know where to begin and they want to be involved, but maybe they're afraid. Like, I think, for the rest of folks listening to this who've been involved for a while, like, the question is, like, what are you doing to be a partner in the journey with someone who maybe doesn't have all the right words, but has like a really pure heart to learn and to change? I think especially for white people, right? Yes. That to me is the white fragility that hangs us up is not the white fragility of being able to talk about race. It's the white fragility of being unable to go and spend time with our white brothers and sisters who don't have it perfectly figured out and bearing with them as they learn on the journey. That's the part where we misstep. That's the part where we need more people. And that's, like, for me, what happened to help me get to the place where I was.
That is such a good point.
Yeah.
That how little patience we have with people who have good intentions but are not there, or at least aren't where we are, or where we imagine that we are. Right?
Yeah.
That you're not quite woke enough, in the most pejorative sense. But that, I'm guilty of that. I know I am.
And remembering how humiliating it is to have to acknowledge those hard parts, right? Like, to remember when you say the wrong thing. When you say the wrong thing and you either just offend somebody you respect, somebody who you want to love, or you just look like a fool. Like, that is embarrassing. It brings shame and it shuts things down. And if we want to keep it open, we got to be willing to give people a chance.
Yeah.
A lot of chances. I mean, I need the chances
Me too.
all the time. And I mean, you know, racism is one of those areas. But you know, if we can all come to that place where we're open to learning, which means we're open to failing, we should expect to fail.
Yeah.
Then we can offer that to other people.
Yeah, and failing's doesn't mean we're a failure, right?
Right.
Like one of the things I think that was hardest for me to come to realizing in this work is that being a racist is not a static identity that I either am in the past and am not now, or wasn't in the past and am now. It's a fluid identity that I live into or live away from with every decision I make or everything I say. You know, it's not something we are permanently or aren't permanently. It's something that we either live more away from or more toward in the choices we make. Right.
Yeah.
And to be able to like meet people in that, you're going to fail. I fail. I've failed even in the process of the convention, you know, like there have been things that have happened to where I have to remind myself, like, this is not fundamentally who I am. It's what I've done. And now I have a choice to make around what I do now. And I want to do differently. And I want to do that with other people who I love, who are walking with me on that. That to me, if that could become the way we operate as people of faith around race, you know, I mean, it's just true of being a disciple, right? We're not like perfectly disciples of Jesus now and don't need any more work. We're like,
I'm so grateful for the disciples. I am so grateful for people like Peter, who is just a total screw up. I mean, he denied Jesus 3 times. And that's who Jesus was like, it's you. You got to lead my church. Like, you need to keep this work going. Like, what?
Yeah.
Like, okay, well, if Peter can do it, if you know, you know.
One of the core values of Open Table UCC is that we are a community bound together by our common love, not our common belief. So if your belief changes, you are still welcome. Because I think a lot of us have had that experience of being in somewhat fundamentalist churches, one way or the other, liberal or conservative, where you start to question your beliefs. You start to change. You start to ask different questions of the things that are just conventional wisdom. And you find yourself either explicitly or implicitly on the outside now. And I think Protestants are really guilty of this more than anyone else, because we began because of doctrinal disputes. And then instead of coalescing around one identity, we just made different ones. So the Lutherans went over here, and the Zwinglians went over here, and everyone went their own way and started their own thing. So we've just been splitting ever since. And so when we want to leave a church, we just start a different denomination. With a whole different belief system, right? This is just what we do. And I think the same can be said. I know that in a previous church I was a part of that was really progressive and really justice-minded, a person left the church because they were using styrofoam cups. And they said, how can you call yourself a church that cares about the environment while you're using styrofoam cups? And the pastor said, this is another form of fundamentalism. You escaped fundamentalism, but you didn't. It came with you. It just changed its shape. And you're still basing your belonging on our common beliefs about what's right and wrong, and not around any kind of common love. And so we want to make sure that anyone who's a part of Open Table is, no matter where you are and whatever journey it is that you're on, you're beloved and you're welcome. And it doesn't matter if you lose your faith entirely, you're still welcome as a part of our community.
Because we're all on a journey. Like, I can't promise that I can do that perfectly, right? Like, I know I'm going to mess up on that. I'm going to place unrealistic expectations. I'm going to, and have to scale back and be like, wait, I'm sorry. I put something on you that's not yours. Like, which if I can't get it right, like I need to give grace,
Yeah.
for others. So.
Well, the dogs are barking, which means that we are at the end of our time together.
We did set them to do that.
We did set the dogs upstairs to bark at the Amazon delivery person at exactly 2:15, the time when you had to leave. So thank you, Claire and Juliet and Amazon person. And thank you, Will, for the time that you spent with us and sharing your heart and what you do. And we're looking forward to both the reaffirmation? Is that what's the
refounding convention?
The refounding convention. That's the word. And
a reaffirmation of vows.
Bus tour in which the folks are not sleeping on the bus, but are going to be all around the state doing some really cool work. We look forward to hearing all about that. And hopefully somebody who listens to this podcast connects and is at one or both of those things.
Yeah. Thanks for having me.
Thanks, Will.